Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for coming out on this dark, wet night. I feel a bit, I don't know if you have this phrase in Polish, but in English we talk about teaching your grandmother to suck eggs, which means telling people who know things very well how to do them. And I feel that because I've just spent a very interesting day meeting people involved with participatory arts and outreach work and education work from cultural centres in Warsaw, and been very impressed by what I've seen. So I'm going to talk, I've called the talk A Restless Art. Where's this? Okay, this image, I will come back and explain what you're seeing there later in the talk. Mostly the PowerPoint is to show you some pictures of some of the work that I'll be talking about. I don't know why this doesn't seem to want to stay. Let's try this. Okay. Sometimes I'll explain the images, sometimes I won't because they're just illustrative, but if there's anything that you see that you're interested in, then you can ask questions later. So, participation. Participation, I think, has become almost a cliche in contemporary art practice. And that's a problem, I think, because what it means is that we might be in danger of taking it for granted, thinking that we know what it means and that it's straightforward. And I don't think it is. I think it raises many important questions and also ethical and political questions about the practice. Okay, we're going to struggle here. What I wanted to do is touch on some of those questions now, and I hope we'll be able to continue with them during the discussion. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the origins and development of what is now called participatory arts, but wasn't always called that. And I'm going to offer you a working definition of what it is. Then I'm going to talk at more length about the three intentions that I think people bring to this work. One is the idea of cultural democratization. Secondly, the intention of social change. And thirdly, cultural democracy. And when I get there, I'll talk about each of those ideas, at least in my understanding of them. This is going to be tiresome. I'm sorry, you're just going to you might have to put up with this snapping out of... and then we'll talk about where we go to next. Okay, underlying all of this, I think it's important to go back to a big change in how we have thought about, how we now think about culture, which I think goes back to the Enlightenment and to the industrialization of Europe. And at that point, we get some new ideas principally from Kant, which divide art from entertainment or from popular culture or from craft. There is this idea that's encapsulated in the phrase fine art, which is separating a particular idea of art from all other ideas or all other interpretations. And from my point of view, I think that's problematic in a number of ways, but I would say that the idea that art that emerged from the Enlightenment now is treated almost as a form of religion. In other words, it's a faith based on universal and absolute values that offers transcendence within and beyond human life, and imposes a set of roles and values on both the people who work in this field and on the rest of society that often we're not aware of. And those ideas underpin a great deal of what we end up trying to do when we're talking about democratization or cultural democracy. But of course, if you take a broad view of culture, and this is a picture I took a year ago in a very remote village in Kyrgyzstan near the Chinese border of a participatory art project where kids are learning how to play traditional music of the Kyrgyz people. Of course, we are all involved in art and culture all of the time, in all kinds of ways. We write stories, we make photographs, we dance, we do all sorts of things. And we do it very often without thinking about it as art or special or important. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is about how much this kind of work is validated, and all of the other things that we do as a matter of course, how much that is validated within the culture of our societies today. The reason we end up speaking of participatory art, given that I think I would almost say would say I have never met anybody who doesn't have an artistic taste, a cultural life. Some are actively involved, others are happy to enjoy what is made by other people. But given that we actually are all participating in art, why do we talk about participatory art at all? I think, and we'll come back to this, there are two core reasons. One is the idea that the elite art should be enjoyed by more people, because it's true that lots of people don't enjoy the elite art that is provided by the public sector. And the other is more that actually art and culture is so important that it should be the resources to be able to enjoy it and use it for your own purposes should be available to everyone. And that's the core of what this talk will be about. Now, the origins of community art in Britain lie in a bigger cultural revolution of the 1960s, that challenge to other forms of authority. And there is a connection with what I've just said, because the community artists of the 1960s were young people, often the first of their family to have benefited from the post-war baby boom, and the first of their family to have gone to university, gone to art school. They very often came from working class backgrounds. They came out of those art schools and conservatories asking themselves whether the values that were being promoted by those art schools were actually consonant with their own experience. And what many of them wanted to do was to take art back to the communities that they themselves had come from. And while that work is often seen as politically radical, and this is an image from one of the seminal theatre companies of the time called Welfare State International, founded by John Fox and Sue Gill, who were exactly those kinds of first-generation working-class young people who had gone to art college and then didn't want a career in the arts. That work is often seen today as political, and it was in a variety of ways, although not all of it was political. But I think what is often underestimated is that its challenge, its radicalism, lay in rejecting the art world's values. They rejected the idea that the best way to be an artist was to make a career in the art world, to be seen in galleries, to be recognized by critics, and to have a market value. And there was a whole group of artists who came in Britain who were emerging in the late 60s and 70s and presented a very big challenge to the arts establishment. And that challenge has not gone away. because what they were really questioning was the legitimacy of the art world to define value, to define what is good, to define who is an artist and who isn't an artist, and how art should be practiced. Now, in Britain, it was not the only place where that happened, but it tended to, that early development of community arts in the 60s and 70s tended to be in the Anglophone countries, so to some extent in America, but certainly in Australia and in New Zealand and some other places. By the end of the 1980s, I think I would say that that struggle was lost, by the community arts world, or that's what it appeared to be, because it happened in the context of the rise of neoliberal economics and politics and thinking, the election of Margaret Thatcher in 1979, a great deal of industrial strife and political strife in Britain. Towards the end of the 1980s, the beginning of the 1990s, people stopped using the word community arts and started talking about participatory arts, and there's a shift that I've written about where I think community arts in effect becomes depoliticized, and you could see that as being the defeat of the challenge of community arts, the triumph of the art world in partnership with some of the neoliberal ideology, the concentration on the individual, the privatization not only of public services, but the privatization of issues like unemployment. So that is I think that is true, but it's also slightly more complex and more interesting than that. I think that to some extent you can now, with hindsight, 30 years later, look at what happened in the end of the 80s and the 1990s, and you could look at it as a kind of subversive infiltration, where the ideas and the methods and the practices that the community artists had invented had actually infected the rest of the art world. And they'd done it in a number of ways. One was that the art world, by the 1990s, the art institutions had become, certainly in Britain, in France, in Germany, in some other countries as well, it had become completely standard to invest significantly in outreach programs. This is from the Philharmonie de Paris, which has a big outreach program in some of the poorer districts of Paris. Most orchestras, museums, galleries today have programs that are about encouraging people to take part in their work. Another way in which the thinking of community arts had influenced the rest of the world was in a recognition of the social value, the social impact, the social change potential of community arts. And in fact, all these images are from work that I was involved in the 1980s. And some of my work, some of my research work, was influential in highlighting the social benefits of this work. And that also gave the cultural sector a new form of discourse to have in cultural policy and in social policy, and say, well, yes, we're a cultural organization, but we have a significant social value as well. And then, of course, contemporary artists became increasingly involved and interested in the potential of participation as a strategy for involving people. Sometimes that was radical activist art, sometimes it was about relational work, sometimes it was confrontational. This image is from a piece that happened this summer by the American artist Spencer Tunick, who invited 3,000 people to come to Hull, which is a port city on the east coast of Britain, and be photographed standing in the street wearing nothing but paint. Some of the best of the work, I think, are the institutions that have really actually understood what community arts was about and have built it into their practice. This is from National Theatre Wales, who are a new theatre company. They the National Theatre Wales was only created 6 years ago, and it has no building. All of its work is in places or in borrowed buildings. That the image that you can see there is from the Passion. They did a version of the Passion over 3 days at Easter in 2011 in the industrial town of Port Talbot, that involved several hundred local people as well as professional actors. So under that work has created a plethora of labels and theories: socially engaged practice, community-based art development, relational art, activist art, and so on. And in fact, this is an image from the Tate's website from a piece by the artist Suzanne Lacey, who will be here in the next lecture and workshop in this series. Now, I think I probably, to be honest, couldn't explain to you confidently what all of those things mean. Even if I could, it would still be wrong, because each of those words and labels is used differently by different artists in different contexts. What all that amounts to is what I call a restless art. And it's restless because people don't agree what it means, they don't agree what it's for, they don't even agree what to call it. I don't think that's a problem. I actually think that is why it's such an interesting and lively and arguably the most creative aspect of contemporary art practice of the last 50 years. It's the reason why it has spread across the whole world and involved so many people. It's the reason why it matters, particularly at a time like today. So that restlessness is what gives it energy and creativity. I want to give you a simple, broad working definition for this big field of participatory arts, whether you talk about community arts, socially engaged practice, whatever. We can call it all participatory. And for me, this is not a tight definition, but it's a rough thing. Participatory art is the creation of an artwork by professional artists and non-professional artists working together. Now, let me explain two aspects of that. Oh, sorry, I'll go back. The first, I use the word professional artists and non-professional artists because I don't recognize distinctions between artists and everyone else. An artist is just somebody who's doing art, right? That means we would all be artists if we started doing art here, now. We wouldn't necessarily all be good artists, but doing art, artisting, as I like to call it, artisting is something that is as much open to us as speaking, or imagining, or writing, or anything else. Whether we do it well, whether we do it for the right reasons, whether other people like what we do, is irrelevant. That's a question of degree. What I'm talking about here is a question of kind. When you are doing art, you are an artist. Whether you've been to art school, whether anybody else recognizes you're an artist or not, doesn't matter. So for me, the distinction is between professional and non-professional artists, not between artists and so-called ordinary people, or all of the other labels that are used. That's the first thing that I think is important in my definition. The other thing that is important for me in this definition is that you're making an artwork. In other words, you're creating something which didn't exist before you came in the room and started making it. You're doing something which nobody knew you could make before you came together, because it has only come out of that partnership between professional and non-professional artists. This is a performance I saw in a Portuguese prison, done by a wonderful, brilliant man called Paolo Lemera with his organization, a local community organization called SAMP. And this is a professional orchestra performing Don Giovanni with the prisoners and the guards and and some professional singers. And they were making Don Giovanni. They were not making an education program. They were making an experience. And it was certainly one of the most memorable, powerful experiences that I have seen of an artwork. So this is about making art, not anything else. Sorry, let's go forward. So I think this big field is easier to understand if we don't think about art forms and we don't think about theories, which are the more usual ways of approaching art in the history of art, but if we think about intentions. And I'm going to talk now briefly about three big overlapping intentions and some of their problems with them. Okay, so the first intention is cultural democratization. This is the classic bedrock of much post-war cultural policy. It's associated with the welfare state, the idea that the state should become involved in providing culture, and of course it's providing that elite culture from the Kantian idea. And so then it's a strategy about ensuring that more people have access to culture. And it started, of course, by building facilities in the post-war period, partly because there was a great deal to rebuild, to bring culture closer to people. But then as it became clear that lots of people actually weren't that interested in going to the local new theatre that had been built for them or going to listen to concerts from the orchestra that had been established, programs started to be developed. And this is a classic example, gallery program where people are being encouraged to discover the artworks. But as you can see in this box, which is a quote from a study was published last year in Britain called the Warwick Commission, the wealthiest, better educated, least ethnically diverse 8% of the British population forms the most culturally active segment. So for example, also from that study, of the audience for subsidised music in the UK, 44% of that audience comes from that 8%. That's what cultural democratization is trying to overcome, to interest people in that. And the phrase great art for everyone is the mission statement of the Arts Council in Britain, which provides funding for these kinds of activities. And this is Skegness, a seaside town in eastern England, and the Arts Council is very kindly arranging for people to enjoy opera on the beach. So this is really trying to take opera to people where they're enjoying themselves on the beach. You can't get away from it sometimes. This is another big program. Currently, the Arts Council is investing £37 million in a 3-year program to take the arts that it's already subsidising to 21 areas that, according to its statistics, has the lowest level of cultural engagement. The program is called Creative People and Places, and it's certainly doing lots of good things. It's mostly doing things in streets and workshop type activities. It is trying to persuade more people to be involved. One of the problems with this idea for me is that it is fundamentally based on a notion of self-improvement, that going back to that Kantian idea, that if we can somehow interest people in something in the streets, something easy, they will get the message and they will go on a journey of self-improvement that will lead them to the nirvana of really enjoying the elite arts. And I don't mean to disparage fine art at all, but there are two problems with it. It elevates that particular kind of art to an absolute, whereas it just may be the best that we do, but it is never an absolute. Secondly, it makes whatever people are already doing, whatever people are already doing, as somehow invalid, because it's just a stage on a journey to somewhere better. And I think if your relationship with the people that you're working with is, however unconsciously, the relationship of a missionary who is trying to convert people to their faith, a missionary who believes that the people they're talking to are somehow wrong because they don't yet understand how they should be thinking, I think it's very difficult to do anything good. The second intention, the second big intention of participatory arts practice is social change. This is from, oh, it's come off the edge. This is from a theatre company called Geese Theatre in the UK, which works only in prisons and the criminal justice, and they use art to help people involved in the criminal justice system to change their lives. So actually, the logic of this is that if you found a better tool than art, you would switch what you were doing to using the better tool. If football was better at helping people in the criminal justice system to change their lives, then you should be using football. And there is a lot of very good work that happens in this field. Interestingly, this is one of the areas where the Global South has been very innovative, and so in places like Brazil, people like Augusto Boal have had a much greater influence on participatory and community theatre in Britain than even some people in Britain understand. So that sense of using art and culture as a tool for emancipation, for empowerment, for education is very powerful and an important aspect of participatory arts. This is an image from a festival called Bealtaine, which is the Gaelic word for May. Bealtaine is an Irish festival which is a month-long celebration of the arts and old people. And this year there was something like 120,000 older people who took part in Bealtaine. In events like this. This was a huge thing they did, a singing event to mark at dawn that they called the Dawn Chorus. Across the whole of Ireland, people gathered to sing at dawn. And huge numbers of people are involved. It's a tremendous festival, and it has a huge impact on many people's lives in terms of improving social networks, reducing loneliness, and all sorts. One of the difficulties with this intention is that we confuse the benefits of participation with the benefits of the arts. Actually, what people are getting from Bealtaine and many of these other things is they're getting the benefits of participation. They would get similar benefits if they were involved, if they joined a sports club or a church or an environmental campaign. They're the benefits of self-confidence, new friendships, learning new skills. This is a older people's theatre group from Liverpool who are fantastic, and they would say they have learned a great deal. But we don't talk enough about the artistic benefits, how the benefits of participating in the arts can help us to befriend our imaginations, to learn artistic skills, to learn how to express ourselves, and crucially, as we'll come back to make artistic statements. The other thing that's important to understand about the social benefits, social intention, is the outcomes of art practices are unpredictable. And yet, very often the discourse is about saying, if you know, this project is about helping young people on a housing estate to get back into school. Actually, it's impossible to say whether involving young people in a theatre program will have particular effects, because we all bring ourselves to an artistic experience. It is not something that is done to us. It is only works if it is done with us. And so at the heart of the dilemmas around social change are the question, again, going back to the last intention of, are we helping somebody or are we supporting self-help? I think the self-help works here, but if we're helping somebody, then for me that brings up a whole set of questions about by what right do we decide that somebody's life needs improving, that their life would be better if they did this? What is the thinking that's going on there? Okay, the third intention I describe as cultural democracy, and it takes me back to those early community artists, of which this is a group, a remarkable group from the northeast of England. Again, those young artists who came out of working class culture, went to study at art school, and were then told, the guy in the middle there was one of the founders of this group, he was literally told by his tutors at art school that he had to forget about working class culture, because now he was an artist and he had to be involved in what the art world was doing. And he turned his back on that and formed a remarkable theatre and photography collective, which is still going strong and has a wonderful website that you can see called Amber. Their intention was cultural democracy. It was about giving people not just access to art, but access to the resources to create their own artistic lives. By resources, I mean equipment, materials, but also knowledge, training, critical discourse. This is an image that for me is emblematic of that period. This is from Greenwich Mural Workshop in London, and Greenwich Mural Workshop is actually where I started as a community artist in 1981. I started as an apprentice with Greenwich Mural Workshop about 6 years after this was built. Murals were one of the big ideas of community arts, partly because these young artists were fine artists, so they'd come out, they'd been trained as painters, and they wanted to do something. This was a community mural that shows people in this street called Floyd Road resisting the plans to demolish their street. The street was actually intended to be demolished, and partly as a result of the campaign that they led, which was represented by this mural, the demolition was stopped, and the people are still living in those houses 40 years on. But of course, this was so one last thing to say about this. Murals were a very political thing to do, because they are an occupation of public space with a political statement, with an assertion. And it's been very interesting to me to see how Kiev has suddenly, in the last 5 years, become maybe the European centre of mural painting. There are literally dozens of sometimes fantastic murals being put up in Kiev, because Kiev is bubbling over with all that you know about. But what's interesting is that the artists, the murals in Kiev are not participatory. They are artists, they are activist artists making work. Because of course the problem with this work is you need a high degree of visual sophistication and technique to be able to produce an image that works as a mural. And so murals fairly quickly died out. Now, the core beliefs of community arts that have sustained and moved into other forms of practice than murals. Oh dear, stop it. Okay, the first, that all human beings have equal rights. It's a rights-based practice which says there is no difference between artists and other people. We're all equally able to have an artistic life. Secondly, that arts and culture have an irreplaceable value as a means of development. So that is partly that Kantian idea of self-improvement, but it is our personal development, and it is irreplaceable. And if we all have equal rights, we all have equal rights to access the arts and culture as a route for our own development, not simply as a way to learn about art, but as how we grow as human beings. And thirdly, and in some ways for me the most interesting, they are central to the democratic process. Democracy is not just about electing people or having political meetings. Democracy is a complex process by which competing interests in societies try to negotiate and balance their interests. The idea of being able to represent yourself in that vast social discourse by which a society decides what is good and what is not good, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, the idea of being able to represent yourself is vital. In any society, in my society, there are people who are marginalized, who are not heard. So for instance, young people, people with mental health problems, migrants, disabled people, gay people. The list could go on. At different times, they have been spoken about in our public discourse, but not been able to speak for themselves. Art is one of the fundamental critical ways in which we can enter that world and speak about our experience, ourselves, our perspective. That, to me, is why this really matters. I'm always wary to make this comparison, but I think it is worth saying, having spent part of my day today at the Jewish Museum in Berlin, Warsaw. The first part of stripping away Jewish people's rights was stripping away their right to be in the cultural life of Germany. Why was that important? Because you took away their voice, and then there was only propaganda to say this is what Jews are like. Because Jews couldn't say, no, we're not like that, we're like this. That, for me, is at the heart of this. So, this is, cultural democracy is above all an exercise of citizenship. A small example of cultural democracy in practice. This is from a small group in southeast London called Enteleki Arts. Very interesting organisation who've been working in their neighbourhood for nearly 20 years. They mostly work with people with disabilities, multiple disabilities, and the elderly. Out of that work has come many things, but one of them has come a theatre company, a theatre group. And they have been doing this project now, just this year. They devised a new project called Bed. And in this project, this performance, they place 3 elderly people in beds on the street of the town. It's happened in several different British towns now. This is a lady called Rosie Wheatland, and she will talk to you. If you go up to her, she'll talk to you. One of the people in the other beds won't talk to you, but if you lean in closer, you'll hear, echoing through the bed frame, you'll hear the voice of that person talking in a recording. Both of these images and both of the quotes come from Enteleki Arts' Twitter feed. So when they're doing this performance, they're not only doing it on the street, and all sorts of things are happening there. They are putting people's reactions out live as it's happening to a wider audience. This project is about loneliness in old age. It's not being done by professional artists. It's being done by people who are talking about their own experience, but they are performing it. And they are representing their lives literally in public space. I'm going to finish quickly now and just give you a sense of how these things fit together. So I've talked about 3 areas of intention. So cultural democratization, social change, and cultural democracy. And together they make a field called participatory art. These are big areas of work, and different projects, different organizations situate themselves at different points in this big field of practice. Sometimes projects start in one area and move towards another. The point is that these three big intentions, they're not incompatible with each other. They work together, and it's more a question of, am I closer to one area, am I closer to another? The importance of this for me is less where you stand in this field than you know where you stand and you know why you choose to be there. What it is you're trying to do. What is your relationship with the people that you are working with? What is your understanding of the art that you're trying to make with them? For me, that also is why this is a restless art, because it's not a fixed place. There isn't a way of doing participatory arts. There isn't even a good way of doing participatory arts. There are bad ways of doing participatory arts, certainly. But there are hundreds of good ways of doing participatory arts. And in the images that I've shown you, I've tried to give you a sense of some of the variety of approaches that are used. I think we are living in some ways, the most frightening times that I have lived through. And I remember times that were definitely frightening, like when the first cruise missiles were brought to West Germany and to Britain in 1981 and 2 and 3, and the nuclear clock was moved to 3 minutes to midnight and so on. So I don't say it lightly, but I think we're living in dangerous times because they are so unstable. During the Cold War, there was a limited range of things that could happen. But now I'm very conscious that my own government is proposing to withdraw from the European Convention of Human Rights. I never thought I would live at a time when my democratic government did not understand the importance of human rights. The dangers that threaten us as a European society and as a world are complex and multiple. They come from all sorts of directions. I don't have any response to that, but I think that a restless art, which is based on relationship, is based on rights, is based on dialogue, is based on listening, that has something to offer in this unstable world. And I think that is why it has grown so much in recent years, and why I see wherever I go amazing things happening. People in Egypt, people in Tunisia, people in Lebanon doing extraordinary work because they can. Even in Greece, where so much is falling apart, I've met artists doing fantastic things because they feel the need to, because their society needs it, and they are citizens, and they want to engage and build conversations and create art that expresses their vision of an alternative way of living. So on that maybe pessimistic, but I hope also hopeful note, I'll finish, and thank you very much for your attention, and be very happy to have a discussion now. Thank you.